Greetings. So I hope this is coming through. I'll be checking the chat to make sure that I'm actually getting some audio here. In the meantime, I will be having two guests coming on right now, both Ray and Kevin. Again, this is sort of a weird setup, so I apologize in advance. I'm going to check the chat for the sound and make sure that they're actually hearing this. So in the meantime, this is going to be another one of the Christmas series open streams. I'm going to this time, however, be taking on some people from the left side of the internet. So at this point, I'm going to say hello to Kevin and Ray. So hey guys, how's it going? We're now recording and we're live streaming on my channel. So welcome Kevin and Ray.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring on other people from the more right side of YouTube as the stream matures. But in the meantime, yeah, I also have to apologize to people. My OBS is kind of falling apart here, and a lot of the setup I had to show who's talking wasn't loading due to some problem with the application. So I guess I'm just going to start off with some small. How has your guys' 2018 been? What do you consider the state of left YouTube to be, and what do you see going forward in 2019?
I'll let Kevin go first.
Well, my 2018's been pretty good. Yeah, and left YouTube's probably getting a bit bigger and a bit better, really. But I mean, it still could do with more people, I think.
Well, it's certainly better funded. Originally, before the whole Sargon debacle, I did a survey of Patreon accounts, and I discovered that if you want the money, then you have to have basically left wing will get paid about 5 times the amount per view that a right wing channel will, which is kind of weird, right? So it's interesting dynamics. But I think that it does seem that left wing does have a lot more funding at this time being.
I'm not sure that's true, is it?
Yeah,
I
true.
think that the Patreons and stuff seem to be much higher for.
The Patreons are higher for the left by far. If you go to like a Sean and Jen, their Patrons are way higher than their view count would suggest. And the same thing is true for virtually every political left YouTube channel.
Okay, well, I hadn't factored in per view or whatever, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I was
again,
just going on overall.
We are going to be off to a little bit of an awkward start because this is basically just a hangout, and we don't have any direction really. I guess obviously the big thing in the middle of everything is our big argument over corporate control over speech. That's going to be a big issue in 2019 for the right, I think. And I was going to ask you about that, but probably I'm going to wait a little while.
Okay.
Ray, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think most people already know me, but I now have a YouTube channel of my own, so I've kind of joined that left-wing YouTube arrangements, if you like. Some people know me from before because I used to appear on other people's channels as guest. I became somewhat infamous because of some of the things that I said. Not sure why, given that I was saying things that were fairly normal run-of-the-mill things, but people just kind of overreacted to them. But either way, I think this year has been really, in contrast to many, I think this year has been really great for the left, only because of the fact that, not necessarily due to coordination on the part of the left, but rather because the right has been in disarray and has been largely kind of fighting itself, and Donald Trump has not worked out for them in the way that perhaps many of them thought he was going to, after the series of errors he's engaged in since about June or July of this year. So I don't know. It kind of feels like we didn't do anything, but we're winning.
Well, I mean, that must be how it always feels on the left, right?
Well, not always. Like, I mean, if we go back to say, I don't know, the late 1990s, for example, I think, the generation that came before us, because obviously in the late 1990s we were, sort of barely now coming up, but the generation that had come before us, they had to do a lot of work to establish the what was later known as the third way system, which in a sense is kind of like halfway to the left, but not really. I mean, they had to do a lot of work to establish that, so it's not always been kind of like a walk in the park. Whereas this time around, it kind of felt first like everything had been completely wiped out, and then when you kind of looked at it a second time, it started to look a completely different way. Like, I mean, even in terms of, I mean, you're going to bring this up later, but I thought I'll just put this in now as well. I mean, even in terms of the behavior of ostensibly capitalist companies, for example, on social issues, they have come to conclusions which are quite remarkable. Like, they've come to the conclusion that, the most profitable thing you can do is to be accommodating to other people's lifestyles and so on and so forth. And so it's almost like you barely have to do much work to convince them of this fact, because the previous generation did most of that legwork for us.
Well,
And so it's almost like we're just safeguarding. We're just safeguarding what the others already did.
The corporate elite are essentially they're delivering victories to you. I mean, you gotta you must find something kind of disturbing about that, right? Like, if your theories are right, why are corporations cooperating with you to crush your enemies?
Well, I mean, you would expect it in late stage capitalism that this is what would start to happen if you had laid the groundwork correctly. Because if you read
capitalists
through
would ally
Das
with
Kapital, for example, yeah, that if you read through Das Kapital and you read through the Grundrisse, which I'm obviously pronouncing incorrectly because I can't speak German, if you read through them, you'll see that Marx never explicitly said that capitalism was incapable of creating progressive action. Like, capitalism for him was one of the most progressive forces on earth, but it will have to be supplanted eventually by socialism. So it should not be entirely surprising that capitalism will be more progressive than the things that reactionaries are saying about capitalism, if that makes sense.
But this,
I
at
mean,
the end of
think
the
about
day,
it this
seems
way.
to
I
be a
mean,
raw appeal to power, though,
no,
right?
go
I
for it.
mean,
You go first.
it seems to be a raw appeal to power. Like, once essentially socialism, once the handmaids of socialism become corporate profit making, I don't know how to distinguish socialism from just like corporate fascism at that stage.
Well, the capitalist system obviously distinguishes itself by the fact that um, you have surplus value being extracted from workers, and there's accumulation of wealth at the top. So, for example, you're looking at Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon, for example. I don't think anyone can look at Amazon and say, "Oh, yes, that looks like socialism happening right there." No, it's obviously the furthest thing from socialism, but at the same time, the leaps and strides which they have made, and the amount of sort of progressive accomplishment that's been carried out under it, means it's safe to call what's been happening a progressive form of capitalism.
So this basically is a progressive endorsement of the capitalist system at the end of it. It seems like. I mean,
Well, I mean,
the capitalist system is
no,
exerting raw power on people's ability to express yourself, and you're saying that progressivism should essentially endorse this because it, like Marx and late stage whatever.
I should obviously make this disclaimer. Not everyone agrees with me on this. So for example, Kevin Logan, for example, might not actually
Yeah, I'm
agree
going
with
to
me on
ask if
this.
Kevin Logan does agree with this. Do you agree that corporations are like the vanguard of a new progressive march towards socialism? That the corporate masters are essentially the implementers of that?
Not the
Oh,
implementers, but I mean laying basic logistical groundwork, which will be useful
To me,
later. This is a stage we have to go through.
to me, laying logistical groundwork means you're the implementer. But go ahead, Logan.
no, I don't agree with the analysis of my fellow guest there. Possibly because I don't put much stock in what Karl Marx said. Um,
Well, then, how do you make this sort of alliance that Ray pointed out between multinational corporations and the left? Like, most of your victories come from these sort of I don't want to say autocratic, but just draconian actions of corporate bodies. It seems.
no, you're essentially you're putting the cart before the horse. You're saying why are these companies doing this for the left, and it isn't that way. It's essentially the left has as actually one way I will agree with my fellow guest is that the left, the previous generations of the left, have done a really good job of changing cultural attitudes so that things like saying white N words and the like is unpalatable. to the populace and to corporations and things, to the point where it's now profitable for companies to turn down money. The PR they get alone is worth more.
But
So it's not the
you're saying, but that's just that I seem I'm sorry, Kevin, that just seems like an endorsement of corporate power. I don't see really a difference between what you're saying and what Ray is saying. I guess. I mean, you can say that like, okay, well, I mean, like let's say for instance that I agreed with you that uttering, you know, the N word even in an attempt to attack the alt right and neo Nazis meant that you should be shunned from society. Does that mean that multinational corporations are the implementers and the arbiters of our society that can now carry out that development? That seems to be the problem, right? And are you
well.
endorsing them as
Firstly,
such?
no, not at all. Firstly, the idea that he's being shunned from society is rather
No,
ludicrous,
no, he had his
overblown.
income terminated. He had his income
Exactly. Yes,
terminated.
so he's not been shunned from society. He's still perfectly
Kevin, this
free to
is
say what
a
he wants.
distinction without a difference. If I were to
Um,
terminate your income, I think we would see what we were talking about, right?
no, because I rely on my income. Carl's got a fair amount of money still coming in. He's not going to
Okay,
starve
this is
anytime
again a
soon.
distinction without a difference.
But
You have your income terminated for saying a
okay, but
word.
that's not being
Now, who
shunned
gets to
from
decide
society.
how
That's
this
an
is done,
absurd,
right?
overblown piece of trickery, frankly. I mean, it's nonsense. Um, but no, in terms of uh, whether I endorse this or not, basically it's in the kind of uber capitalist, if you will, where money is. Unfortunately, you've created a situation where having that money and having that ultimate power do control those things. Now, I'm absolutely all for taking that power away from them. But
Oh,
I dare
okay.
say that the free market capitalists would not be quite so keen.
So you don't think that multinational corporations should be the ones who enforce speech codes in society to the point where they can terminate people's income?
No. Why would I possibly think that?
Because you were, I mean, I saw the reaction to this on Christy Winter's channel, and it seemed like you're both quite positive about this development.
I thought it was fucking hilarious because he's a cunt, but I mean, that's a different
I
matter
think
entirely.
so. You're willing to sacrifice your principle if you don't like the
It's not a
person.
matter of sacrificing my principle because I'm not making a decision here. I have absolutely no influence on what Patreon do or don't do.
You have a
I'm just
decision whether
reacting.
to support this publicly or not, right?
To
What?
You broke up there. I didn't.
I said you have
What,
a decision
what
whether
was
to
the last?
support this publicly or not, right?
But I'm not saying I support this publicly. I'm saying I think it's funny because Carl has tried to platform other people. He's being given a taste of his own medicine. I don't agree necessarily that Patreon should have the power to fuck people over in that way. I'm just saying it's funny, and that's a different matter to supporting a thing.
Well, I don't know. I seen. So you're saying you say you and Christie's position on this more or less is
No, no,
that
no.
you
I don't speak for
okay,
Christy Winters. That would be
maybe
unfair.
not, but I mean you kind of get the sense of what this crowd thinks, right? The position in this crowd is you vehemently support it, but you're laughing at it anyway, uh, because you don't like Sargon, kind of.
No, it's not just a matter of not liking him, although that is, of course, a part of it. It's the fact that he's getting a taste of his own medicine. He's tried to deplatform several people on both left and right, actually.
Okay,
The idea that he's some sort of champion of free speech is an absurd lie.
I think that we're kind of in a strange position. If you want to take, I still feel like it's the same thing. So I guess there used to be this concept called solidarity, which was that you always back people up on principle, even if you did not like them personally. So, for instance, the principle of solidarity would be, you know, maybe this guy was a real piece of shit in the factory, but if the boss comes and fires him because, you know, he broke his leg, right? You still go to the wall for him, even if he was like a total slacker otherwise, right? Because it's not on principle you don't fire people for breaking their legs or other medical conditions, and that was always when I was growing up, that was
This
always
was
the
not.
principle of solidarity going forward with all of these things. It seems like that's
Well, that's the thing.
kind of being broken here,
This
right?
was not something done to Carl. This was something done by Carl. It wasn't
No, what was
someone
something
else
done to him?
forced him to say anything. He said that of his own free will.
That would make
Having an
sense, Kevin.
industrial
That would
accent
make
is
sense,
quite...
Kevin, if you believed that what he said was a justification for termination of income, which he said that was
Well,
not
like
in
I
the
say,
context of the
in the
code.
land of the uber capitalist, it is because they have the right to refuse
Kevin,
to serve it on
we're
us.
talking about what you think, not what capitalists think. We're talking about
But
the
again,
principle you want to
I'm not
have.
making the decision here. Okay,
No,
I'm
I'm not.
saying
I'm not
I'm
talking
just
about the
reacting
decision.
to
I'm
a
talking about
situation.
what principle you want to actually defend against Patreon, right?
I don't defend any fucking principle against against Patreon or any other company. I
I
want
mean,
these people to not have the power to do these things, but I
okay.
don't have any fucking say in the matter.
So if we agree that we don't want Patreon to have this power, wouldn't solidarity be a principle that we would want to pursue?
No, because
Why
I don't
not?
see the idea of solidarity with those who would happily shit on you a worthwhile thing to do.
I mean,
Well, this is the political problem, though, isn't it, then? That you can't hold both those positions at the same time. Either you say that what Patreon did was right and perhaps it was implemented incorrectly, or you say that they were wrong and then you're forced to stand with Sargon of Akkad.
No, I'm not forced to stand with anybody. I can accept that something may or may not be wrong and still decide that there are other ways of going about this, or that there are bigger issues at play.
I'm going to welcome to the chat some people from my own server. I think we have Benedict the 17th and Anarcho Rain here. Hopefully, we'll get some more people in. If you want to introduce yourselves now, guys, I apologize that in the chat we do not have icons because the app crashed and I wasn't able to get it working by the time that we had to go live. Do you want to say hello?
Hey, name's Anarcho, Traditionalist Atheist. How you guys doing?
And I think Benedict it is it?
Yep. Hi.
So-
I'm Benedict the 17th. I'm a Catholic liberalist.
Okay, well, how about this, Benedict? Do you have a case to be made for Sargon in this case? I mean,
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. You can review the solidarity one I made, or a different one if you like.
Well, I think your solidarity one kind of hits it right on the nose, although I might express it in a different way. I might perfectly be willing to say that um, Patreon might have had a right to terminate Sargon for what he did. Now, I'm not saying that Patreon was right to do it. I think we can talk about the morality of terminating someone's income, especially right before Christmas. But as far as having a political right to do so, I think there's a case to be made for Patreon there. However, the fact that Patreon might have had a political right to do so, again, doesn't make it good for them to have done so. And I think that means that we, as kind of the civic polity, when we talk about republic, we're talking about the res publica, the public things. And I don't think anyone can deny that, in a sense, Patreon, YouTube, the streaming community is in many ways a public thing. It's a public forum, even if it's owned by private companies. And therefore, I think that it would be good for us, and perhaps we might even have a social obligation to stand with Sargon of Akkad, despite whatever our personal opinions of him are. In a sense,
Just to,
yeah, Kevin, I agree. I do think Sargon has picked some stupid battles, and that he has shit on people that he shouldn't have shat on. The reality, though, is I trust, in a sense, I trust. I'd rather have Sargon shitting on me than having Patreon and PayPal shitting on me.
Yeah, I mean, Sargon doesn't have
just
the
to pick up on
power.
one point Benedict made there, if you're saying that this is some sort of public concern, favour of taking it into public ownership, then
I don't see
I'd be
how
in
that.
favor.
I don't see how that modifies the problem. Wouldn't that just create like? So you're saying that we'd have like Patreon would be taken over by like the Department of Speech Regulation?
no. But the point, well, I mean, there's no such fucking department as far as I'm aware. But
Well,
the
it would
point being
be
is that you
illegal to
then
have
have
that
some
department in the
democratic
United
accountability.
States.
That it would have democratic accountability in a way that it can't have now.
What about like an internet bill of rights, which I think it has been talked about? I think certain top politicians, maybe Ted Cruz, has said something about that. If I'm remembering that right, I could go for something like that. I think
Yeah, that's a
natural
good
monopolies
solution.
do need to be regulated. When you have these certain private companies that, by their very nature, will own such a controlling share of the market that individuals will not be able to use it unless the state puts in some kind of regulation to, and it would basically be to give people the same. At least in the United States, this is a little bit of a problem. Sargon's not an American citizen, so, but for American citizens, it would guarantee their right to a private company's to use of the private company.
Okay, but that's
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
it seems like. Do I understand you correct? Are you asking us to nationalize all internet companies, or to create an internet speech department? Because I don't think
I'm not
that'd be
asking
legal in the
you to
United
do anything.
States.
I was merely asking a question because this is a thing that's come up before, and I've had this. Well, I've had this discussion about a point that Paul Joseph Watson has made several times. He's all for free markets and all the rest of it until he gets fucked over by the free market, and then all of a sudden he wants the government to step in, which he claims that's not real capitalism. That's
I mean, I think you have
corporatism.
a case of Sargon was like libertarian, but Sargon's Sargon's like old. Basically, Sargon's like an old moderate from the '90s. He'd be like a moderate labor from the '90s or something.
Well, I don't know that a member of UKIP could really classify as that, but
Well, I'm
I think
talking about we're talking about retroactively classifying people, but Sargon's not like a Ayn Rand person. I mean, like for
no,
instance,
he's
what's
no,
being
he's not.
discussed right now, and I want to get your guys' opinion on this.
well, I
What's being
think
discussed right now, hold on,
sorry.
is an antitrust suit being brought against Patreon for and PayPal for what appear to be illegal anti-competitive activities. That seems to me to be a very promising start to tamp down on corporate control of speech online, and I don't see why the left would disagree with pursuing that.
I mean, I
Yeah,
should also point out that in the current climate we have, you're not even, I mean, you're not even allowed to, private companies are not currently allowed to discriminate on any given basis they want. Even the smallest companies are not allowed to discriminate on matters of race, gender, or orientation in at least certain states in this country and in certain European countries. So why wouldn't someone's political opinion, which honestly, people don't really have that much control of as you would think. It's not that easy to control. Why wouldn't that be given the same? Why wouldn't that be a protected class? Race or gender is
Well,
my question.
sorry guys, can I just let them answer the question I brought to them originally, like
For sure, that's
first?
fine.
Because we asked Ray and we asked our guests two questions, and I didn't quite get their response. So I guess like given that you guys are for corporate regulation and making sure that multinational corporations are not the arbiters of the public square, it seems the most prudent action would be an antitrust. Would you guys support that at this stage?
they've
I'll go
committed
first then.
crimes. Yeah.
I would say I'll let Kevin go first, actually, since he spoke first. Go on.
So yeah, I was just going to say yeah, if I've got no problem with them doing that. If they've committed crimes, then yeah, that's fair enough.
Because I think that's where
Well,
we're
it's
really
gonna make a
heading.
difference, but I mean, they'll find ways around it. I'm quite sure, but
I mean,
something
Go ahead,
permanent.
I'd say those, but those ways around it, like we need to kind of construct things so that they can't find those ways around it, right? Isn't that what's kind of most?
That was my point. Yeah, we need to have some. I say we, obviously, with different countries and things, but there needs to be a way found, a more permanent. I don't know if it's a bill of rights or whatever, but some much more permanent, solid structure to keep the things in place, rather than just saying, "Oh well, if a company does X, we'll just have like some sort of reaction force. We'll take them to court." No, we need to stop these problems arising.
Well, how do you propose that we stop them from arising to begin with? It seems that if we destroy these companies' bottom line and make it very unprofitable for them to do these things, they'll stop doing them, like Ray was just saying, right?
Exactly. Well, that would be one way of doing it. Yeah. I mean, if it's
I'm a little bit worried about the idea of how much damage it might be caused through an attempt to stop them, as opposed to just letting what's happening happen as it is, because you have to weigh one against the other. So, for example, if people start implementing this so-called Internet Bill of Rights, for example, how does one control what's going to be written in that document? For example, if you create that in the United States now, it would be the populist right who would get to decide what's inside that document. So all that would happen is that you'd end up with an outcome which is actually further to the right than the actual companies themselves are.
Well, it's only going to be a part of the populist right if the left excludes themselves from this conversation, like I feel like they currently are. If they get on board with our attempts to hold these corporations to account and support our lobbying efforts against Patreon right now, then I think that they can be part of this conversation, part of the people who draft the Bill of Rights together, right?
Yeah, but I think no. But the thing I'm thinking of is that it's possible that, let's say, Republicans end up leading that process, and the Democrats coming and have a bipartisan agreement with them on how to draft this Bill of Rights. I have a suspicion. I'm sure people out there will understand what I'm saying by this, but I have a suspicion that what they would do is they would deliver an unexpected DR3 result, which is where they're going to declare Democrats are real racists, and then proceed to limit speech using the very same Bill of Rights, which was supposed to originally not limit it, if that makes sense.
Can I ask you a question?
They'll come in and say, okay, well, if it's bad for you to say, then it's bad for everyone else to say it in these contexts as well. So they'd essentially turn around and, pull a big trick on us by essentially shutting down all forms of identity politics in political speech, rather than actually expanding it and allowing everyone to engage in it.
I mean, I don't see how.
Can I also just say I'm not sure that the populist right would be right in this document for a start, because Democrats are about to take control of the lower chamber, and this bill wouldn't be passable for the next 4 or 5 years potentially, which means you could have, it could be Trump again, it could be someone on the left. Who knows?
Society Man, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think a useful model here might be, if you consider workplace safety, which has, I think, drastically improved over the past few decades. The main motivator for that has been lawsuits. So, if you want to incentivize corporations to kind of move in a direction that they're currently not moving in or moving against, money is the best motivator for them. You make it possible. You create these restrictions, you create these violations, and if they transgress, they are liable for huge amounts of money. That's been how we've basically knocked workplace fatalities way down. And I don't see why you couldn't have a similar sort of system for saying, if somebody is, for example, just engaging in political speech in their off time, or using your service to engage in a manner that doesn't violate any laws, that you cannot just penalize this person for reasons, that are entirely unrelated. That you can't cut off a person's income, you can't cut off a person's you can't cut off a person from your service just for that.
Yeah. So for instance, we want these things to be transparent and abstract, detached from the people and our opinions of them. So should an internet corporation be able to terminate someone's income because they utter a racial profanity out of context, of any variety, and any media outside of the specific media that is being dealt with by that internet company? Is that the rule? If that's possible, it seems to me that it's very likely that the internet companies could have free reign to terminate anybody.
Practical problem you're going to run into in trying to pass any of these laws is, and
there's plenty of practical problems, but the first step is to get the left on board with this idea, because I think it's very problem. As Society Man laid out, it's very rational, right?
You're looking at it very one-eyed, if that makes sense. You're saying the left are against this, but I assure you, especially in America, the free marketeers who make up the bulk of American senators, GOP senators and congressmen, or Congress people, whatever, aren't going to want to pass laws that impinge on free markets.
So are you saying that you think the left should stand behind what Society Man and I were just outlining there? A single standard backed up by penalties that can be applied to companies in specific damages, and also perhaps followed up by antitrust. I mean, that seems to be a very effective and a very clear
pulse. That would be an improvement on the current situation, right, but my point is...
But wait, hold on. Yeah, that's the key, right? It can't. It has to be a single rule. It's binary, right? Otherwise,
I've got a question
My
to add
point
into
is,
this
you're
as
looking
well.
at the left and saying the left are the problem here. The right are also the problem here as well.
Okay, well, I'm sure there's some people on the, but I always want to make sure that the specific elements of the left and right that we here are representing are of one mind on the specific issue, because it seems to be just common sense.
Well, the question I have, which is fundamental, that I think no one has addressed yet, is why does the United States get to be the ones making these rules in the first place? Why not raise this bill in China?
Sure, China has its own rules. Are you kidding me? China
No,
has
but
a whole set of
you're going to be applying
regulations
them
that Google.
globally. If the United States regulates Twitter, then it means you just applied the rules specific to the United States and its social problems. You just apply them to the entirety of the world.
It means that
Well, the
Twitter.
United States
It means
did
that Twitter can't do certain things. Otherwise, the United States will open them up for liability. Just like Twitter can't do certain things in China. Just like Google can't do certain things in China. Now,
And I want to
Google
say-
has able to. Pardon me. Let me just take this one more before you take it, Society Man. Google has been able to deal with the regulations imposed on it by the Chinese Communist Party. It can deal with the regulations imposed on it by the Western countries as well. Go ahead, Society Man.
And just to make a moral point, like the United States, if any country could feasibly like regulate the internet for the world, the United States invented it. Like it's a DARPA project. It belongs to us more than it belongs to anybody else, but that's not to say that we can't have our own local rules. Like they don't have to be universal.
I think that kind of, dare I say, slightly arrogant attitude will be tested in the next 50 years by China.
What do you mean that we can't have our own rules in our
No, you can
country?
have your
I
own
mean,
rules, but the idea that America has some sort of imperialist hegemony
But I think we
will
said
be
the exact
tested by
opposite,
China.
Kevin, though, didn't we? We said that China is free to impose its rules, but these are the rules that we want in our countries.
No,
Yeah,
but
I probably shouldn't have chosen China as my example because they have a very closed-off internet in the first place. So they're not part of the entire world when we're talking about the internet in the first place.
But China has
just
demonstrated
any other
that.
random country. And you just why not any other random country rather than the United States imposing these rules then?
Well, sure, if they
Well,
want
because
to.
the U.S. is the beacon for the kind of liberal world order.
But
What,
I mean,
still now?
Might have been before Trump.
I probably would differ with Distributist on this point, but I do think, from where I stand as a liberalist, I do think liberalism is a good thing. It is a positive development of Western thought, of Western culture, and more than that, it's an evangelical thing. There is a certain sense in which in the same way we can talk about African culture, Asian culture, we can't really talk about Western culture in the same way. In a sense, the West, people make the comment, white people don't have a culture. And there's a certain sense that that's true because we don't have a culture, we have a global culture. In the sense that the West, it's a universalizing culture. And I think that comes from a lot of different things. The early emphasis from Greek thought, Christian thought, but wherever it comes from, the way the West has developed is it's not a regional ethnic culture in the same way other large cultural zeitgeists are.
See, I would totally disagree with that, Benedict. But
Yeah, me too.
like for instance, no, it doesn't matter though, right? Because I think that for Kevin's objection though, he said that we can't have the West make rules because those rules might be confused for international rules. But it seems like that just that it seems like that. But hold on, before you make that point,
just say that's
a much
not
more pertinent point here, which is if you say that, then all you're saying is that there never can be any rules imposed on these corporations whatsoever.
No,
because the first actor that makes the step.
Can I just clarify? I didn't say that, and I didn't intend to mean that.
Can I finish my point before?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Benedict.
Essentially, where I'm going with that is that you might call it U.S. imperialism to impose international rules from the United States, but I actually don't have an issue with that. I think the United States Constitution gives the U.S. a moral mandate to be, in a sense, an imperial force. I don't call it imperialism, I call it evangelism, if you will.
Yeah, I disagree with that as a concept entirely.
Wow, this really is a Christmas truce because we've got both sides of the right here.
Before we
Yeah.
get to the prescriptive notion of whether the U.S. does have that right, can we just get to the descriptive point of whether the U.S. what the U.S. determines for internet policy in our country may not necessarily determine internet policy in Britain, France, the rest of the world, and so forth?
Guys, I just want to say, I think we should try to give like the right and the left an equal amount of like airtime here. So we shouldn't just have
Yeah,
like,
I was
right-wingers arguing.
thinking-
We
agree
shouldn't
with
just
that.
have right-wingers arguing with each other.
I agree with that, yes.
So Kevin, what were you going to say?
Go ahead, Kevin, please.
Just muted
He may have
himself.
stepped away from his
It
microphone.
would help if I unmuted myself, I suppose.
It would, yeah.
Yeah, I will give Distributist a charitable interpretation and say that you accidentally misinterpreted what I'd said. I wasn't saying
Fair.
that America can't impose laws or that rules shouldn't be in place. My point was rather more to the American chauvinist attitude as expressed by, I think it was Benedict. And I was just saying that that kind of arrogance will seem phenomenally misplaced in 50 years' time when China rises.
Yeah,
Well,
perhaps it might.
Sure.
But I guess what we're arguing is what the post hoc framing is going to be after we pass this law, not whether we need to pass it, right?
I mean, this is leaving aside the fact that the rise of China is something that's not. People act like it's already been done, when in reality it's a very iffy thing if you look at it closely. But
More than
point, I think leaving Benedict's point about the American Constitution being somehow superior aside, which I don't agree with necessarily. But leaving that aside, I think it's sort of the internet as a thing is pretty much the only way that you're going to get any sort of, especially just throughout the internet that is not in China. The only way that you're going to impose that kind of rule is to get it through a U.S. legislature. I mean, whether you like it or not is sort of irrelevant. The U.S. does run the internet more or less.
Maybe we could agree on the
So
practical
it's America's
points.
fault.
Well,
put it this way:
maybe.
we don't have to make appeals to power. I'm not making appeals to power, and I don't want to. I don't want to say that the U.S. should dominate this. I don't want to say that just that's the way.
Well,
things
I didn't
because
say
that's the
should,
way
I
things
said-
are. Blackjack is currently working to silence people like you. It's currently working to silence people like Sargon. So those sorts of appeals, I don't think they're helpful here.
Well, I considered that.
This is nonsense.
Let's go back to Kevin and
Hold on.
Ray. Let's go back to Kevin and Ray.
Yes.
Has anyone considered that if you did enact the legislation in the US that you're talking about as well, these companies, these tech companies, they all have one bug out location that they plan to go to if you try to do something like that. And that place is Singapore.
Do you think is Singapore like rushing to? I mean, do you think the culture of
Yes,
Singapore
they've
is a culture that
created-
would support silencing any reactionary voice, like as moderate as Sargon?
They wouldn't
Oh, they
support
very well
passing
could.
No, they wouldn't support passing a law against companies who choose to do this, but certainly anything that's disturbing to them, they would obviously want to say, okay, well, maybe you should silence that because they do it
Well-
already. But the thing about it is that they provided a lot of incentives for companies to relocate there, along with subsidies and tax cuts and all kinds of things. So if you push them hard enough, Twitter could just run to Singapore, for example.
Are very
My obvious counter to
prohibiting
this
hate
would be
speech.
to say that the United States could just deny these companies market access, don't comply with their regulations, which is what China does.
China probably does suffer
Basically,
for
to
that.
tell to Twitter if they don't comply with the regulation on not, punishing people or complying with the regulation for punishing people for speaking freely, that Twitter is not allowed to operate within the United States, which is what China does, Google and all.
Can I just interject as well? I just want to point out
Sure. We should be giving.
verbally, as earlier when you were going about him being ostracized from society or whatever, the idea that he's being silenced here, this is absurd. He's
Well,
not being silenced.
he is in a way.
That's not absurd.
His money being taken away does make it incredibly difficult for him to operate on YouTube effectively.
Well, okay, Kevin, he's being penalized for speech.
No, hang on. I get a fraction of Sargon's money. I'm able to operate.
There are progressive.
I put out more videos than
But Kevin, we're not talking about some of his money being taken away. We're talking about all of it, effectively.
Look, let Society Man have a point. So go ahead, Society Man.
I just want to say, Kevin, if you want to say that this is like not a big issue, why then did PayPal just instantly demolish like Subscribestar as soon as Subscribestar appeared as a viable alternative?
No, I didn't say it wasn't a big issue. I just said the idea that Sargon is being silenced via this action is ridiculous.
He's having multi-billion-dollar corporations collude to cut off his income.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal.
If I fired someone for expressing the wrong political opinion,
I didn't say it wasn't a big deal. I said he's not being silenced.
Okay, let me put it this way. Let me change the claim. It's not Sargon is being silenced. Sargon is having billion-dollar entities collude to cut off his income.
It's indirect silencing at least. Like if I fire someone for because I find them posting the wrong opinion, or I find them using language I don't approve of, maybe I'm not silencing them in the most direct fashion possible, but no one would see that and say like, oh yeah, no, he just fired him, but because of this opinion. But that's not, that's not.
I have a question for Kevin. I have a question for Kevin. I have a question for Kevin. Were the communists who were fired because they were on the blacklist in the 50s during the House on Un-American Activities hearings? Was that for generations? The left said that the House's Council on Un-American Activities was silencing people, but all they were doing was getting them fired. Was that not?
No, they were getting them fired, no, they were getting them fired, and there's a slight difference in that was actually a governmental body, so that was direct infringement on freedom of speech.
Okay, but the action is more or less the same. They were having their incomes terminated
the action
only for their political opinions.
Sargon still has his platform, and there are many other streams by which
Kevin, can you clarify something for me? Are you saying it's
guys? Blackjack, let him finish, please.
Okay.
Yeah, the point being that those people, like you say, the House on American Activities, those people were being directly fired, and they were blacklisted, so they couldn't get work elsewhere. And like I say, it was a government institution rather than a private company, so it was a direct infringement of their freedom of speech in a way that this just isn't for Sargon.
Well, can I say like
Society Man?
Okay, go for it. Are you wanting to go for a blackjack?
Yes, I am. So Kevin, I know that you don't. Obviously, you're not a free market person, but what I'm hearing you say is basically it's okay when corporations do it, which I know you don't believe. So I'm going to ask you to clarify that.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the right has built an economic system whereby companies, via the power of the dollar, are able to fucking wield this kind of power, right?
Well, yes, but
that's
okay.
Don't we? Hey, Kevin, don't we agree that's a problem?
System. Well, I despise that system and want to tear it down.
Okay.
But that's, the right built this.
That's kind of what goes around comes around. I'm not really understanding the argument.
Well, Kevin, I want to respond. I want to respond to Kevin on this point.
Yeah,
Kevin,
go ahead,
has Sargon promoted like free marketeering? Like, has he been like on the forefront of this argument, saying we should remove all restrictions from these companies?
Free marketeering, no.
Okay, then it doesn't seem like it's really like what goes around comes around. I don't see a karmic element.
Well, I'm not saying what goes around comes around. I don't know how you've interpreted what I said as that.
I might have heard somebody else say that.
I believe Christy Winters almost literally said that.
Christy Winters did, yes.
Yeah, like
obviously Christy's not here. So
I understand. That's not fair, but yeah. But sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Okay.
Well, no, I was just going to say I'm not Christy Winters. If she said that, you'd have to take that up with her.
Yeah, which obviously, again, she's not here. So
the reason I said goes around comes around because you said the right wing, and now Sargon. You might consider Sargon to be a right winger. Most of us in the chat don't, but that's another story. You said the right has built up this theory that the free market, that private enterprise is allowed to do whatever they want, and they can discriminate against customers however they please. And because they've done that, because the right has put that idea forward, that means that we shouldn't try to fight that, or because we're
I'm-
on the right? And go ahead.
I would love you to join me in the fight against this uber capitalist system.
Yeah,
I
will.
just somehow fear that for the most part you're not going to.
No,
We're
No,
proposing to do that right
out
now.
to you on
I'm
these-
happy to join you in that fight.
I
Yeah,
think
me too.
historically there is a good point being made here by Kevin, however, if I understand it correctly, which is that in the past people were not singing this tune, because I'm sure we all remember this controversy about quote unquote bake the cake, in which the person was not obligated to bake
I
any
can
kind of
explain
cake
the
for anyone.
difference. I can explain the difference because I think natural monopolies are not the same. Because I would defend the Christian bakery in the same way I defend Alamo Draft House to have a male-only screening of Wonder Woman or black-only screening of Black Panther, because they're not
I
the
agree.
same as natural monopolies where the very nature of the market will allow only a few competitors, maybe even one competitor, and then it's like, well, if you're not going to have many different competitors that you can go to when one cuts you off, then yeah, you need the state to come in and either provide it itself or regulate the one private monopoly allows. And so for social media, if there's only one competitor for now, then yeah, the state kind of has to come in and just apply the First Amendment to these utilities and say, we're going to regulate this as a public utility. So anyone who isn't breaking the law by whatever, inciting violence or doxing people, what have you, as long as they're sticking to the law, then they can say whatever they want under the First Amendment, however hateful or however it might, even though it might appear to cause violence in the future, it's not directly inciting violence and it's legal. It should be allowed, because natural monopolies are not like every other private company. That's the distinction.
Well, it seems like we have why can't we cooperate on this one issue? Because I think we're here just asking the left for cooperation, and it seems like the left is saying that they won't, or are they looking?
No, but again, I have to point out to the distributist here, it's not. It really isn't just the left that are the problem. Because, like I say, try and pass your Internet Bill of Rights through the Republican Senate.
I mean,
Well, I mean, Ted Cruz, which is one of the more free market senators out there, has proposed a bill like this. So
It's one thing proposing a general. This is the problem I have with the liberalists. It's fine having these kind of broad ideas. Is when you actually get down to brass tacks, when the real
well, he
politics.
proposed specific
we're talking
legislation.
talking about what's right here, right? We're not talking about like an exact plan of action from A to B.
But this is my point: is you're saying the left of the problem. I'm saying the actual roadblock ultimately is the free market fucking bullshit of the American right and the British right, to be fair as well.
I think
That's what's going to
needs to
actually
be drawn.
really
If I
hamper
can
this.
respond to Kevin there, I just want to say that as far as getting down to brass tacks, it seems like the liberalists, more than any other of the internet groups, have actually taken the opportunity to do so more than any other group. I think
No, because they've just come up with a group of like vague fucking terms, like, well, individual rights are nice. Well, yeah,
no,
but what does
actually,
that actually fucking mean?
we are a group of nonprofit organizations that have actually had several meetups, put up several campaigns for different policies, and we actually have gotten some of our members into elected office.
Oh, wow, okay, I didn't know that. What offices have they gotten into?
Mostly city offices.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, but I was unaware that anyone had gone in. Okay, oh, that's interesting.
I think there's a useful distinction to be drawn here, because like people talk about the right and the left, and both of those terms are very broad. And I think what we need to distinguish here is between the cultural right and the economic right. Now, the economic right and the cultural right, there's no reason why these two groups should ever overlap. They can, but there's nothing that binds them. Like the academic agents of the world, or the Rothbards, whatever. Like we're talking about the libertarians, the people who just want as few restrictions as possible. There is nothing that ties that to people who want like a cultural Catholicism, something like that. Those are entirely at odds. And I would say like Distributist right here, his name is Distributist. Distributism, that is entirely opposed to like free market capitalism as you're talking about it, and as the left often talks about it.
I'm this channel has not been an apology for unmitigated free market capitalism.
That's
just
fine.
not what the right
I
is
can't
now.
I can't speak your content specifically, but my point, look, the only point I'm trying to make here is that you can point your guns at the left, metaphorically, of course. Point your guns at the left all you want, but ultimately, it's not just a matter of the left opposing this. There are lots of people
I'm not pointing my guns at the left. I'm
on the
holding
right
out my
who oppose this
hand
too.
in cooperation.
No, I'm now more than happy to
We're pointing our
cooperate
guns
on this
at
because I
people
think
like
this is
Kristen
going to be a
Winters.
big issue.
And our
All right, sorry.
Let Kevin talk, okay? Yeah.
I was just going to say I'm more than happy to take your hand and of course, and fight this battle because it is going to be massively important. But I think actually one aspect of this we haven't even talked about, but I think is going to be hugely important, is that we are all of a younger age than most elected politicians. People don't understand what the fuck any of this conversation even is.
Well, it's talking about
Until that ends, until you start getting younger people into high elected office, you're not going to get, and therefore any legislation.
Is that necessarily true? But hang on, like Bernie Sanders is like 80 years old or something, right? What about Jeremy Corbyn? Like some of these people who are these beacons of socialism in both the United States and the United Kingdom are geriatric.
Yeah, no, my point
I was going to say, oh, sorry.
Guys, I appreciate that this is a very crowded chat, but let's really focus on giving space for people to make their points made. I know I haven't, since I'm more or less the moderator, I know I haven't been super good at this because I've cut in to try to get people to speak, but just be aware of that if you can. So go on, Kevin.
I was just going to say my point wasn't that it's just the right that way. Most elected politicians, left, right, or centre, and don't use the internet, don't know what the fuck it is. Even those that do, like I say, Donald Trump uses Twitter and stuff. You ask him about this conversation we're having right now, he wouldn't understand the fucking start of it, and that's fine because they're fucking old and they've not grown up with any of this. But until that starts to change, the actual political culture and political approach to this isn't going to change either, and that could be decades ahead. By which time it could be fucked.
Okay, so I think this is a good stopping point where I can read my super chats. By the way, just a reminder, since this is a Christmas stream, all the super chats will go to charity. We have $106 going to St. Vincent de Paul. And if this doesn't crack like 50, I'm just going to put those super chats on that order. So I don't have like a bunch of like $15 amounts going to a charity. But just starting from the top, we have $2 from YJHVY. You hear what Ann Coulter said about free speech? I actually haven't heard what Ann Coulter said about free speech, so maybe someone can clarify that. Has someone heard about what Ann Coulter said about free speech?
Probably racist.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll talk about that later, okay? Okay, so the rightful king of Finland for €2. The left has goals and the corpse try to profit on them. Well, that's certainly true. The corpse definitely seem to be on, like I said, there's a lot of victories on the left and they all seem to be brought in by Mr. Corporate America. So thank you for that contribution. I certainly agree with it. Any comments on that?
I think much of the lobbying done in terms of anti-environmentalism would suggest possibly otherwise.
Well, I mean, I'm a pro-environmentalist. So
Yeah, I mean, just to make this point, I've noticed that what a lot of corporations will do is they'll buy liberal politicians on social issues, and a lot of the liberal politicians will then sort of let the corporations run around wild almost on economic issues.
Say, for example, like a liberal migration policy, that's a policy that very much benefits corporations.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. And to follow up on this, we have $9.99 from Rashid Abul Salam. He says corporations help the left insofar as corporations need CEOs, and the social justice left wants them to be women. Corporations want socialism insofar as they don't want to have to pay for employee health care. I think that's a great point. The corporations entrenched corporate power benefits from socialism in a lot of ways because it essentially likes to have a very, very dependent population that's propped up by taxpayers.
Could I just add to that? I think we need to distinguish when you say corporations, obviously, hashtag not all, the health insurance companies are the ones who are going to lobby the most against socialized healthcare. But that you're right, that doesn't mean that other corporations outside that market wouldn't benefit from some type of socialized medicine where the needs of their workers are kind of farmed out or outsourced to the government, and then they only maybe just have to pay a little more in tax, depending on how you want to pay for it and all. But yeah, I think social democracy and welfare states kind of go hand in hand with helping the corporate machine just make workers more docile by buying their servility and their obedience. I guess I'm kind of on the same page with accelerationist socialists with that.
I want to get our left guest's opinion on that tweet, or sorry, on that super chat. Ray, is Ray still here?
I think, to be honest with you,
yeah, I'm still here, just listening in.
Okay, well, if you want to take a reaction to that, go ahead. Otherwise, Kevin,
did you want to say anything?
I think just go ahead, Kevin, if she doesn't have anything to say.
Okay.
Yeah. Or repeat back the last thing you said again, if it was supposed to be.
It was just basically this super chat was just riffing on the idea that corporations benefit from. Well, the first one sort of implied that corporations benefit from progressive social ideas, and this next one says that corporations, at least ones that are highly powerful, benefit from progressive economic arrangements, which usually have to work with entrenching the existence of corporate power to begin with, and therefore make them less vulnerable to competition.
Oh, you mean it raises barriers to entry?
Yeah, among other things too. The one he mentioned here was that it allowed them to essentially pay much lower wages, both through higher competition in the global labor market and also by essentially forcing the workers to supplement on welfare.
Well, I mean, this is one of those things that becomes possible as you continue to develop productive forces, because you can actually afford as a company to pay for these things, whereas obviously people who are now starting up can't afford to pay for the extra effort you have to go through for diversity training, all of these kind of things, right? And so it does in fact raise a barrier to entry, but this is not necessarily a bad thing. Because if you think about it, if you think about it for long enough, you'll realize that many of these things, where you have this romanticization of the small business, what exactly are they romanticizing? Less benefits?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Does Kevin agree with that?
What do we agree? I would argue that in terms of having a docile population, I know the phrase is sort of overdone or whatever, but this wage slavery, the idea that basically if you don't go to work, you're going to fucking starve and you're going to be homeless. That's pretty good in terms of keeping people in place, and that's not a leftist concept, is it?
I guess I'm not really following it. It seemed, well, I don't know. Maybe we could move on from this, but it seemed that Ray was saying something to the effect of that the barriers to entry were good because large corporations are better for people just generally.
If I can respond to that claim for 1 second, I mean, you might say that, I mean, maybe there's fewer benefits at a small business, but I mean, ultimately what having more competition allows for in a market is more volatility, right? So Walmart can't just dominate and then treat its workers however and deliver the most efficient product if somebody else can come along and, who also is selling not just to consumers, but to workers, then they have to compete for the best labor.
There's this great quote by G.K. Chesterton that I'm sure Dave is aware of. It is something to the effect of, "My problem with capitalism is not too many capitalists. My problem with capitalism is that there are too few."
That's too few capitalists. You cut out there a little bit. That's the sort of the famous distributist motto, and I think that is sort of a reaction to sort of the small business, large business thing. ideally, if capitalism were to work as it's hypothetically supposed to, everyone would be in business for themselves, and would obviously capitalism does not work like that, independent of anything else, but that would be the ideal. And I think a lot of times these huge unassailable global conglomerates really aren't inside the original model of how this was supposed to work.
A lot
Can I
of
just
that
ask,
is due to the state
from a
as
religious
well,
perspective?
Yeah,
So, sorry.
Kevin?
Let Kevin.
Kevin had a question there.
From a religious perspective, guys, how do you square you weren't necessarily in favour of absolute free market capitalism, but how do you square your is with the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth?
Oh,
Well, what do you mean?
The
We're not.
formation.
I'll field this one, Anarcho.
Anarcho.
What? I'll field this one. Thank you, Anarcho. We're not. I think you answered your own question. We're not like Randian free market capitalists. We want to use the market only insofar as we can improve the welfare of the society that we belong to. Insofar as you're asking about how we want more capitalists and not fewer, well, actually, it's very good you mentioned that, because there was a papal encyclical called Rerum Novarum, which outlined the principles. It was the original. This was the origin of the word social justice, in fact, and it outlined principles of social organization and good policy. One of them was solidarity, which I already mentioned, right? You focus on the principle and not whether you like the man or not, right? Because of the principle. Another one was subsidiarity, and subsidiarity meant that you want the control of any given resource to be as close to the people as possible, as close to the individual families that it affects. And it's for that reason that I want to see people become masters of their own economic affairs. Not so they can satisfy their own avarice, but I'll let other people answer it now.
That's the thing, isn't it? I think with my main problem actually with capitalism is it's essentially selfishness, and I don't see that's you can
has to be
square
a
that circle with religiosity.
But the problem is man is fallen according to the Christian worldview, because there have been Christian idealists who have attempted to form these societies where they have almost been communistic in their ideal vision of man, but they've just never working out for the same reason that communism has never working out either in the large scale or the small scale, because of man's natural tendencies towards his ego, his pride, his gluttony, what have you. We need a system that acknowledges that inner workings of mankind, but that doesn't mean we have to go all the way to the other spectrum and just let man completely devolve and just completely fall to his inner vices. We have to be able to balance it out so that we recognize man's nature but also cultivate it. So we need property. And,
Can I draw Kevin back to what I said? I don't say anything about the attitude I said that led anything about greed. The only thing I'm interested, I'm not capitalism. I'm not like some kind of capitalist purist. I'm highly skeptical of the institution. The only reason why I'm interested in it whatsoever is to the point where it provides wealth for the society that I'm obligated to. That's the only reason. It has nothing to do with me thinking greed is good. What?
Your description led to that. I'm saying I don't think your description is how capitalism actually works in the real world.
Well, I'm not for capitalism. I'm for learning what I can from capitalism and combining it with whatever else works. Right?
Okay.
Capitalism certainly is not totally useless. I mean, there are some lessons from it, certainly.
I mean, to simplify Dave's point, I would say that our economic position is Catholic social teaching, not capitalism or socialism. Right?
My main problem with socialism itself is that it's kind of what I don't like about capitalism. What I've seen with what the left is trying to do is taking the worst aspects of capitalism and putting on, like, I don't like the centralization, how man is kind of forced to sell his soul for this materialist ethos where he's just constantly working away longer and longer hours just so he can buy the next best television for the cheapest price. But I don't see how that's problem solved either under the most like Stalinist state communism or even a less brutal form of that. I don't understand how.
I have a question
Yeah, go
for
ahead.
Kev. I have a question for Kev. Like given how we've described ourselves, would you consider that to be right wing or capitalist or whatnot, or what are we?
I have to say, I've been misled necessarily, but misinformed about your economic stances. I was led to believe you were much more pro-capitalist than you seem to be. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know you all very well, but I can jive with much of what you've just outlined there.
Oh well, that's great.
I say
That's
one
perfect.
thing.
Oh, go ahead, Anarcho.
Can I just say one thing? A lot of us, me personally, I actually was much more of a staunch libertarian capitalist. I think a lot of us were back in before we came to traditionalism. That's where we started, and we kind of had to evolve out of. And when I say us, I don't even mean people in this chat. I mean people in the larger dissident right. That's a lot of where we started, and we kind of had to evolve past that to see the importance of social issues and to see that just because we don't like Marxism doesn't mean capitalism is infallible, and we just have to throw ourselves upon the altar of money and greed. And it's like, no, we can, while we can accept that man will never be perfect, we don't have to hold capitalism as this ideal moral system like certain Randian objectivists and libertarians might. And we've kind of evolved past that thinking.
Can I put a question to Kevin?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Kevin, here's something for you. Do you think that it is possible to build a coherent economic system out of the teachings of Jesus?
Out of the teachings of what, sorry?
Of Jesus. You specifically brought him up, like, kind of in reference to, like, right-wing capitalism, right? Which I guess sort of is viewed by some people and maybe not without reason as kind of having sort of Christian, kind of a tie to, like, Christianity and religious fundamentalists. So I want to put it to you. Do you actually think, since you asked that question, that you could build a coherent economic system out of, for example, like the Sermon on the Mount?
Well, I'm not entirely sure you could. I mean, as my now late nan used to describe me, an extremely lapsed Catholic. I studied the Bible quite a lot when I was a kid, and I found the teaching of Jesus enormously inspirational. Actually, I didn't, having grown up, you dreamers, if you will. Mm-hmm. He entirely thought through some of the stuff. Some of his more expansive, or not even expansive, slightly more, dare I say, and I don't want to offend you here, but slightly more wishy-washy types of utterances. I'm not entirely sure he here in economic sense at all. The idea that in all of your goods and give the money to the poor, that's not economically viable. Having a system in place by which you don't have poor is possible, I would think, but really an economist, was he? So I'm not sure you would expect that on him.
That itself runs contrary to one of Jesus's most famous statements, right? Like that the poor will always be with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a mistake in superimposing 21st century economic policy onto 2,000-year-old scripture. I think you're not going to get a coherent answer either way. I'd say that my critique of the capitalist system would be that it's not a good in of itself. The market cannot be your ends.
Okay, well,
you need to have something better.
I will ask you a question now. I mean, obviously you're not going to defend capitalism, but it is always surprising to me when a Christian, or frankly any of the Abrahamic faiths, given some of the things in all of those books, when they are very staunch capitalists, it seems so odd to me because the teachings in their books this is especially the more rampant, inhumane aspects of the capitalist system. The teachings of their books, and so I don't understand how they've come to that conclusion.
Well,
I mean,
but a lot of people,
someone could genuinely think that that would be a better economic system. I mean, I personally have probably the same criticisms as previously stated about the system. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm certainly not like a ANCAP libertarian or anything like that. But I mean, someone could genuinely think that's a better economic system. That's what will deliver life. They could be incorrect about that, but if that's
they
what
could
they
be in
genuinely
what we'll
believe,
call sincere
It's
error,
possible
right?
to really square that circle between
Or
If
the
you,
selfishness and greed of capitalism
Well,
and the
we can-
teachings of Jesus.
As someone who's not a
oh, look, guys, let the question get asked before you answer it, okay?
Sure.
So I'll go. Do you think it's possible to square that circle of the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth and the more selfish, greedy aspects of modern capitalism?
Yes.
if I can answer this, I think it's possible to try and fail to square that circle. I think that a lot of people can certainly think that it's the case and be wrong.
I guess I'll also flip that question on you. Like, could someone genuinely think that the teachings of Christ would have, communism was a good system, but then they implement that and then it causes like mass starvation or something like that? Is it really about like his personal the feelings he has, or is it about the results of the system? So, I mean,
if you want to say that it's not about his personal feelings, then that seems. I'm not sure how that's going to fit in with theology. The idea that this person is part of God. Surely
Benedict
his
come in?
personal feelings.
Benedict wants to give an answer after.
let Kevin finish before you come in, though, right?
Just going to say it would absolutely depend on according to Trinitarian beliefs, the part God creature of Jesus. Personal feelings would come into this because he couldn't be that badly wrong, surely.
Okay, but would it? Okay,
but let's let Benedict go now. Okay.
Next in queue, right?
Yeah, as someone who probably is much closer to the to a defender of capitalism here, I think the problem is that a lot of people see capitalism as a consumptive economic system. I see it much more as a productive economic system. You have to start at the question of labor, and frankly, I think what we need is an anthropology here. When we talk about economics, we're talking about human beings. We're talking about human beings' interactions in society, and we have to ask what a human being is. And I think if we're going to do that, the Bible is a great place to start. When we look at Genesis, what man is tasked with working in the garden for God. That work is creative. It's very much man is instructed to interpret and enter into God's creative mysteries. And with the coming of Jesus Christ, he also enters into the salvific mystery of God. But it's all through man's creativity and his participation in God's handiwork that he's able to do this. What capitalism does is it's a way of unleashing that. Man is no longer tied to the land as he was in feudalism, nor is he tied to the state as he is in National Socialism and economic socialism of Germany and the USSR. What capitalism does, and why I think it's perhaps the most Christian economic system to have existed, and in fact it did come out of the Christian West in a way that other economic systems did not. It corresponds to our human need to create and share and continue to perfect our creations and to participate with God and with each other in that creative aspect.
So let's get a few more reactions to this, but I do want to transition the topic to one final thing because we're in our last 45 minutes.
I thought this was fascinating that you raised Genesis as a capitalist story, because for me it seems a much almost an allegory for socialism in many respects. That you have a specifically created new world in essence, um, essentially new people, the kind of new socialist man, so to speak. You have manna from heaven, which I don't see how that could possibly be considered a capitalist concept. And then you have people who ultimately, like you say, maybe it's the fallen nature or whatever, but the natural state of man being socialism, being corrupted by the corruption of man.
Well, okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to slightly transition this, given that
Okay.
the right certainly is not characterized by an adherence to capitalism. I think that another element of, and it seems like we actually got to surprising amount of agreement in this Christmas truce on the capitalism on the economic side. You know, a few kind of more abstract theological points that I'm not so sure I even understand, notwithstanding. But I wanted to transition on to like the real thorny elements of the culture war, because you hear constantly from the left like talk about racism and and sexism and all these other things, the culture war elements. And if I were to pick up something that was distinctly different between the left and the right, it is this attitude. It seems that they're operating under different concepts of what these words even mean or should mean, or what human society should reflect. And I wanted to kind of like get both Ray and Kevin's opinion on that, I guess. I mean, I think was it implied earlier that Sargon was racist or something like that? I mean, it certainly doesn't strike me that he is by any definition that ordinary people use of that word.
I I would suggest he is very much a racist. Some of the things he has said over the years,
What does that mean to you?
things
That
like
he's a
race and
racist?
IQ and all this kind of absurd scientific racialism bullshit.
Has he promoted that particularly? I don't remember him promoting that.
Certainly, he's made comments to a certain extent which would be sympathetic toward that view. Let's say.
I'd say, Kevin, from what I've watched of Sargon, like I think he's been entirely agnostic on the issue and basically said, I can't possibly know whether or not this is true, so I won't comment on it.
Yeah, that's
I would
more or
actually
less
go
in my.
further. I would go further and say that Sargon of Akkad has actually wrapped around to the other side of the screen. Now, I'll make a little bit of a joke out of this, but I'll get very serious after this. Do you all remember the video game Mario Brothers 2, where in certain stages, if you walk off one side of the screen, you would wrap around and appear on the other?
Yeah,
So,
it's a common
what
thing
I
in
think has
video
happened in
games.
the case of yeah. So what I think has happened in the case of Sargon of Akkad is that he's actually rediscovered what I would refer to as the third type of racism. So I'll give you what the first two are first. The first type of racism is the one that creates hierarchies between people and says that, one group of people is better than another, and so on and so forth. And then there's what I would call the second type of racism, which is the interpersonal interaction in which someone has decided to have a race bias toward a specific person. So that's on a very individualized level. But then there's a third type of racism, which is the most dangerous one of all. And the third type of racism is the one that proposes that all of humanity is in fact the same, reducing their differences to nothing, and therefore not guaranteeing the protection or even the existence of any groups whatsoever. And I think Sargon of Akkad actually falls within that third type of racism.
Well, how could you possibly? Guys, how could you possibly have? It seems like no matter what position you had, you'd have one form of racism, Ray.
Oh, the only way to get out of
hold on, let me finish my question. Now, are you a believer that there are no? Are you a believer that all traits are sort of uniform on all races? Is that your belief?
No, I don't believe that.
So, by Kevin's definition, you would be racist then.
Unfortunately, but I don't agree with him on that. I would say that I am not racist in the sense that I agree that all ethnic groups have the right to exist and to perpetuate their own existence insofar as they don't harm any other.
So this starts to become my problem. It seems that we have sort of one standard of racism for people on the left, one standard of racism for people on the right. Like, so you would say, Kevin, Ray's belief is just textbook racism? Kevin?
What was that?
Ray's belief is racism, in your opinion?
What belief?
That there are non-uniform distribution of traits in between races.
Yeah, and that each ethnic group has the right to preserve itself and to
no,
adopt
the first part of
social
that,
systems
though.
which are suitable.
No, it's not a matter of traits. I was on about specifically the idea of IQ being is bunk.
What if someone
There
just
are certain
genuinely
If I
believes
say, if I
that,
can just
though?
there's
interject,
Hold on.
does
physical
One at a time.
human
One at a time.
Okay,
biodiversity.
one at a time.
Guys, one at a time. Kevin?
There's a thing called human biodiversity, which is not the way in which the alt-right use that phrase, the actual scientific use of the phrase, whereby you have physical characteristics between different groups which can be and are clearly different.
I'd just like to
That's
ask.
undeniable.
I'd just like to ask Kevin, what has Sargon specifically said that you're taking issue with? You don't have to
Actually, the
produce an
thing you got
exact quote, but
banned
like,
from-
what's the claim?
Well,
Think
hold
what
on.
actually-
Can I just get in there with one more thing before Kevin answers that question? I should actually explain the reason why I decided to categorize things in that way, with those three tiers of potential racism, and then why I explained how he is in the third one, what I would refer to as the third type of racism, which some people actually believe is cloaking itself as anti-racism, even though it's actually a racism. The reason that I pointed this out is because the way that he goes about doing this is that the entire thrust of the reason why he started out his political career attacking what he called, quote, identity politics in the first place was precisely because he doesn't believe that human beings have the right to self-segregate themselves into different groups and to pursue their own interests on that basis.
But
And part of the reason I don't think he does not believe this, hold on, and part of the reason I don't think that he accepts this is because he himself is of mixed origin.
Okay, but
I mean, I hate to be the one to say it, but
I want
that
to
could
bring
be
this
it.
to Kevin. So Ray is saying that if you don't believe in groups' right to self-segregate, then you're racist. Do you agree with that definition of racism, Kevin? That if
No, I
you
have to
oppose
say,
self-segregation, you're racist?
Ree's last, I think, are incredibly racist.
So you're
They-
saying
they-
that
they-
you're saying that if you
Let me-
hold on, Ray, I really have to understand what Kevin's saying here. So you're saying that if we oppose a group's desire to self-segregate, we are being racist by doing that? This is what's so confusing to me,
the
because it
idea
seems
that-
like you just nail me. It seems like any position you
Because
have
it
is.
seems to me that you're sort of advocating there for states.
I can't hear you, Kevin. Can you speak up again?
But it seems to me that Ree was advocating for the existence of ethno-states there.
Well, Ray said that if you oppose self-segregation, then that is a form of racism. Do you agree with that? Do you think that people who oppose self-segregation of different groups are racists? And do you oppose self-segregation of groups?
I oppose self-segregation, yeah.
So, but
How-
so
okay, now
Ray
I
would
have to- I
consider
have to
you a
jump in.
racist. This is this
Yeah,
is the problem I'm
how-
having here.
how can you oppose-
Ray. I'll let you in again after I clarify. This is the problem I'm having here, because if I listen to you and Ray on this topic, by Ray's definition, you're a racist, and by your definition, Ray's a racist, and by neither of your definitions is Sargon a racist.
Yeah,
So
well, people aren't a monolith,
you're
are they?
it's basically like you're trying to shoot Sargon like in a crossfire, but you're shooting each other and you're not hitting him. I still haven't heard a single thing by either of your definitions that makes Sargon racist in either Ray's definition or in Kevin's. And in the meantime, you have described alternate definitions of racism, both of which pertain to each other more than they do to Sargon.
Well, I think my
Help me
definition
out here,
does
guys,
pertain-
please.
Well, I think my definition does pertain to Sargon because of the fact that that's the
Does it pertain to
central
Kevin?
thrust behind everything that he did. So, okay, I'll give you an anecdote, and then I'll also transition into addressing what Kevin said. But do you remember that time when Sargon had that thing at Hyde Park where they went down there and they gave all that speeches and stuff like this, and they were talking about free speech and all these kind of things, right? And they had some people who were doing the recordings for him when he was at Hyde Park. And so I had a conversation on social media with the people who did the recordings at Hyde Park when they had just before Sargon came up and did his thing on stage. They had all these other people who they came up and they did some, sort of semi-joking talks and so on. And they had two people they brought onto the stage who jumped up and down and started talking about how they wanted white males to have children with Asian females inside the United Kingdom. That they wanted to blend people as much as possible. And so I objected to this, saying that basically, we are not your objects to be walking around just handing over our legacy and our history to you.
Well,
just
it's funny
for
because
whim,
I've
for
heard
political
progressives
purposes.
say the same thing about white people and other races as well. So this seems to be a common sentiment you hear about in multicultural societies.
Can I pose a question to?
And so,
to
no, hold
you
on,
guys there?
I wasn't finished yet though. And so, when I put this issue to them, that basically this struck me as very wrong that they would say these kind of things. They basically attacked me and said that basically, this is the progressive position that we won't allow people to blend together freely or whatever because we have opinions that exclude them necessarily, right? And so obviously I just doubled down on it because I tend to do that, and they never reconciled with me, obviously. And so the question I put to Kevin Logan would be, how can you be against self-segregation when this is actually the method through which we maintain our autonomy as groups in diaspora? For example, how would Asian people maintain our autonomy if we don't? If we just intermixed with white people, we would stop existing.
That's an excellent question. So to Ray, that's a form of racism.
Black people, anyone, stop existing. That's just the way it goes. White people emerged and could re-emerge if they did disappear, but they're not going to disappear anyway.
No, I'm not talking about white. No, I'm not talking about white people in this case. White people will obviously survive because they're 90. What is it? They're 87% of this country. I'm talking about the rest of us. We would disappear if we actually just merged into you.
I mean, but Ray, hang on. I have to respond to this. Ray, you have states, like presumably as an Asian, you have states where you have far more like your demographic is very represented. Like your ethnicity is very represented as a demographic, like much more so than in the United Kingdom.
No, that's very true. No, that's very true as well. That obviously states exist, and people have their majorities inside those states. What I'm saying is that if someone else is outside of the state that they originally come from, or the state which their ancestors come from, as the case may be, and are a diaspora in some other person's state, you can't come and argue and say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to be anti-racist by forcing you to become one with the ethnic group which you're not a member of.
No one's saying you would be forced to do anything. You can breed with whoever the fuck you want to.
Yeah, but then why are they why are they so interested in trying to rig the political system or to rig the social system to sort of punish people who don't want to do that? Like, why did I receive that response from Sargon's people, for example? You'd figure that if they weren't about that third form of racism, they don't find me to be so abhorrent and objectionable. Most of the trolling as well. Let me just finish the sentence. Hold on. Most of the trolling as well has been directed toward me since 2016. All of it actually stems from the fact that I have said that, not from any of my other views. Only that.
I think Sargon has proven his commitment to groups being able to self-segregate by his support for Brexit.
So, but to go on Benedict's thing, I want to return to this. It seems like you guys are operating with two incredibly different views of racism. The only thing you can agree on is that Sargon has violated both of them. But I still haven't heard any actual evidence to how he has, I guess.
I don't really give two fucks about Sargon, but I'm interested in Ray, because Ray's beginning to sound like a fucking alt-righter here.
Well, Ray, I want to come to your defense, but like, Kevin, I'll say this: Ray's opinions on this matter have been something I've heard very often from people of color in this country and in the United Kingdom. So, I mean, do you think you have standing to minimize this perspective because like your cultural view on this matter? I guess like what makes your cultural view on this definition of this word take priority over hers?
I'm not saying anyone's view takes oh fuck's sake, I've totally forgotten the word. Apologies. Priority, that's the word I was looking for. It takes priority, and in the same way that, again, it's overblown nonsense. No one's going to force Ray or anyone else to breed with anyone else. It's the idea of self-segregating because what, the color of your skin's so fucking massively important. No.
Do you see the problem?
I mean, do you you guys are both accusing each other of being racist. You don't like. I'm gonna go ahead, Endeavor. You're probably gonna ask the same question I'm gonna ask. Like, do you guys see what's ridiculous about this?
Okay, one at a time.
Hold on. Okay, the question I want to ask is this: if you guys can't even agree on what the definition of racism is, and the reason that you said that Sargon was kicked off Patreon was that because he was racist, and when this accusation can lead to the loss of your employment, do you not see that as a problem when no one can even hammer down what the definition of this word is? but it can result in you losing your job.
Yes, but this was covered earlier in the interview. That I don't think. Sorry, in the interview, in the talk, because I don't think anyone agreed that what Patreon was doing was a safe way.
I know that, but the point I'm trying to make though is the accusation of racism or whatever. You can't even hammer down what it actually means.
Well, that's because
using the original.
That's because I'm using the original definition of racism, and additionally on top of that, I'm using it in such a way that it doesn't make critical race theory impossible to use.
The question I'm asking though is, how do you justify, ruining someone's career over a damning accusation when you can't even coherently define what the word means?
Can I ask a committed question? Can white people be racist? Because I've had a lot of progressives tell me that they can't be.
What?
Wait, Distributist, do you mean people of color?
Oh, sorry, pardon me. Yeah, can non-white people be racist? Because I've had a lot of academics tell me that.
Absolutely, it is possible. I mean, there are structures in which it's possible for a person of color to be racist. For example, if I go to London, for example, and I interact with Saudi Arabians, they are definitely going to be structurally racist toward me, and the reason I know this is because that's what they do, and I've experienced it myself. So, and this is one of those things where that would always be that would be people of color being racist against other people of color. So it's possible. So long as it's structural, it's very possible.
You haven't
Can I ask Kevin the question though? Kevin, do you believe that non-white people can be, or non-people of ethnic European origin can be racist?
Yes, and I don't agree with, and I think Ray's going with the more modern of it being power plus privilege or some fucking shit. I don't subscribe to that view of what this is. If you're a black person who goes around screaming Paki or something, that's racism. I don't give a fuck about structural power.
And so you could be a black person who's racist against a white person?
Well, it sounds like you two actually agree on this.
Well, no, because Ray said structural. It doesn't sound like that non-whites could be racist within a white country where they don't have structural power.
I mean, it was my impression he said the opposite.
If we want these two to sort of hammer out their views, we should probably give them a chance to go back and forth.
Yeah, sorry guys. We should give you more time. Yeah.
Okay. I've stated my position. I don't care about it being structural. Look, if it's structural, obviously it's more powerful and worse, but that doesn't mean that people who are structurally disadvantaged can't be racist.
I think I understand Kevin's point of view, but Ray did use the term structure.
Yeah, we have a different terminology for that. If the person does not have the structural power to affect the person's existence, then that's just race bias. So, for example, a lot of people have race bias, even some unconscious race bias that they're not aware with. But whether it translates into a structural effect is the thing that's important. So let me take as a random example here. Like, obviously, I'm part of the Asian community, and I see in the chat people are mentioning the African and Afro-Caribbean community as being, part of this example they're constructing. So let's say that I'm in the street, for example, and an Afro-Caribbean person yells some kind of random racial slur at me. This will probably not cause significant damage to me. But let's say in a different scenario, I'm interacting with, say, I don't know, let's say a white British person, for example, who has structural power in a majority form society which is controlled by them, then that's a more significant threat to me.
Does Sargon have structural power?
Yes, he does, and the reason he has his structural power, despite the fact that he's not 100% white, as people keep pointing out all the time, is because of the fact that
Patreon basically colluded to sort of cut off his income.
Well, hold on, I'll get to that in a second. Despite the fact that he is not 100% white, he's able to pass as white, and so he has the structural power which is there. However, that has been diminished recently because obviously Patreon has decided to take action against him, and so it's almost like, despite this, he was actually hit with something.
Okay, but neither of you guys have answered the question though. How can you justify this being such a damning label to place on someone when you can't even accurately define what it means? To me, this entire concept just makes absolutely no sense.
Again, I don't have any power over its power socially.
No. What I'm talking about is the accusation that Sargon is a racist, and that's our
again. really don't want to get bogged down in fucking Sargon. Who gives a shit
Okay,
about Sargon?
or anyone for that.
I
Anyone
think
for
it's
that
really
matter.
interesting that Ray was going on about it being structural, being the only threat. I'm sorry, if, for instance, a black person stabs to death a white person while screaming, "You white bastard," actually motivated murder. That seems like a rather
that
large
would be a
threat.
racially motivated murder.
Okay,
So I
but
agree with you
again-
on the fact that it is still possible for these things to translate themselves into threats. Of course, it's just that it's on a different order. Like if a race bias has influenced someone to commit a crime, then that's a hate crime.
Calling it, just calling it, it's not a racist murder. It's just a racial bias murder.
Okay, the point I'm trying to make though is we can't agree on the definition, but if we can't agree on this definition, how can we justify ruining someone's career over something that we can't even come to a coherent idea of what it is? So this is the problem.
Yeah, I want to augment this too. I mean, maybe we don't only want to take this off of Sargon, but a number of people on the right wing, not just Sargon, say for instance Faith Goldie, have been deplatformed. Lauren Southern, another one. They've been deplatformed and have had institutional power brought against them because of this accusation. Now, I don't agree with a lot of these people on any number of issues. Sometimes I think they're fabulists. But at the same time, like I can't say that this accusation doesn't have power over me. If you're on the right, getting credibly accused of racism is incredibly damaging to you. Do you think that's how it should be, Kevin and Ray?
I don't know if it is that damaging, because Donald Trump was accused of being a racist, wasn't he?
But he's a multi-billionaire. The average person would lose their job if they get that levied at them, and we can't even define what it means.
Well, I mean, he still sailed through the selection process for the GOP as well.
And clarification, Ray.
Ray,
clarification. Endeavor specifically said not Trump. He's an outlier. If you look at the average part of society, and in fact, all the way up to the CEOs, these accusations are career-ending. Trump is more or less a single exception point to that.
Well, Trump doesn't have a boss. That's why he's an exception.
Oh, he has 350 million bosses.
If you believe that, then
okay, but Trump isn't accountable to it. Trump didn't win the election because of an institution. Trump won the election because of a political campaign. Those are two different things.
Yes.
I'm also being asked a strange question in the chat, so if it's okay with you all, I'm just going to answer it so that it's answered on stream. I'm being asked about the attacks that occurred in Telford, Rotherham, and other places like this. I'm being asked whether the victims of those attacks had more or less structural power than those who were actually carrying out the attacks. And so I gave the answer in the chat that I believe the victims had less structural power, and people are disagreeing with me for some reason. But to me, it seems quite obvious that if you look at Rotherham, for example, who controlled the city council in Rotherham, who controlled most of the small businesses in that area, and so on, you can actually see that the ethnicity from which the attackers came had structural power in Rotherham and in Telford and so on, which actually assisted them in carrying out these attacks because they were able to quash investigations before they had taken place and so on, using nepotistic power and so on. And so critical race theory can be used in multiple ways, and in this particular instance, critical race theory would actually show to you that Pakistanis from Mirpur and Azad Kashmir, in terms of their origin, had structural power in the locations in which these horrific attacks occurred. So I'm not sure why everyone is so down on critical theory.
The difficulty with this is that you're contradicting like the mainstay of academic theory on privilege theory that's been going around cultural studies departments in the United States.
Why? I'm just using it how it was written. I'm just using it from the context of, I guess I'm not burdened with certain considerations because I'm a person of color myself. So when I point out that another group of people of color are doing a particular thing, it's easier for me to see it than for perhaps a white person to realize it, because during the time period when these attacks were taking place, there were plenty of people who were, women of color, who were actually talking about the fact that they had witnessed these things or been harassed in some way beforehand, and a lot of the white male authority figures were not actually listening to this. So I think the first people to report that there was a problem were actually Sikh girls. And people didn't listen during that time period.
So Endeavor, go, but I don't want to read this.
Okay, I'd like another. I'd still like my previous question answered, but I have another question though. It's that that group should have the right to self-segregate and to decide and to live amongst each other if they so please. Why is it wrong for a group that has that is the majority in their nation. Why is it wrong for them to have structural power? I mean, do the Chinese have too much structural power in China? Do the Turkish have too much structural power in Turkey?
Let's let Ray and Kevin answer that, and then I need to go to a super
if
chat.
if you're a majority in your country, then it would be expected that structural power would lie in the hands of those people. However, what we're talking about when we talk about racism, colloquially speaking, we're talking about unfair racial discrimination, in which basically what the majority is doing is they're using their power to subvert systems of justice which ought to operate in a normal way. So, for example, if we discover that if you arrest like a regular white girl for, like, I don't know, let's say she breaks the shop front of a window, for example, and the average sentence that she would get would perhaps be, let's say the person gets fined £200, for example, but let's say I kick in a shop window and suddenly I'm being fined £1,500 on average. Why would that be so? And so when you analyze that, you can actually come down to a conclusion that perhaps there's a race bias involved there, if when the figures play out, suddenly it's a divide between what happens on one end and what happens on the other. And so we're not saying that you're not allowed to run your own country. I mean, it's quite obvious that you should. But what we're saying is that we would like to avoid situations in which you're unfairly dealing with other groups who happen to be in your country, whether they be on vacation or living there as diaspha.
I want to bring the question to Kevin now.
Can I respond to this point?
Okay. Endeavor, quickly respond and then let Kevin go. Okay.
It's actually Society Man. Just wanted to say,
Society Man. Pardon me.
Ray, do you also believe that we live in a society that probably is dominated by patriarchy?
Yes. Okay. Well, actually, no. It depends on which society you're talking about. Which country are we referring to?
Well, just in the United States, for example, and in a lot of Western countries. Like,
if
you're
yes,
specifically about okay. So if you're talking about sentencing disparities as an example of like institutional racism, right? Like, we know that men get stronger sentences than women for the same crimes. So how does that, for example, gel into like a patriarchy where this group that supposedly has disproportionate power can get disproportionate sentencing?
Because,
so that this ethnic group that supposedly is disproportionately disprivileged can also get disproportionate sentencing. Like, how do you square that circle?
Because structural power doesn't always play out in a completely uniform fashion. So, for example, in a structure, you may have people who are extremely advantaged in sort of the vital aspects of life, but then at the same time, because of those advantages, the same people who operate that system may then punish those of their own more harshly than they would someone who is a subaltern, for example. You also see this play out the same way in mafia logic, for example. Like, if you're in the mafia and you do something that your boss doesn't like, for example, then you're more likely to have that person do some kind of violence towards you than if you were like some just random civilian out there or something like that. And so in certain contexts, the scenario is reversed, but it's not uniform.
So I want to go on to Kevin, because Kevin had an opportunity to respond to that question that was brought. The question about what was it about the definition? About racism, about differential power, like, is it wrong that in China the Chinese have overwhelming institutional power? I think that was the question that was originally asked, right?
No, I mean, if it's you say overwhelming, obviously not, but it's a matter of disproportionality. Also, is abused. I'm not saying for a second that that structural power, a form of racism, doesn't hurt people more than your average other form of racism. I just find it really right. I don't want this to be like a personal attack on you, but you've got like such a scattergun approach to this, and blame people of color in Rotherham.
Am I not hearing Kevin? Oh dear. I apologize to the chat if they're not hearing this. I apologize, guys. We're having some technical difficulties here. Please give me a second to get this back online. I'm not so sure why things are going haywire. but we'll try to get this back up. Oh dear. Well, if I can't get this back up, we're going to have to end early. Can you guys hear me? No good, no good. We'll try to go through the browser window and see if that works. Again, I appreciate the patience in the actual chat here. It's just having to do live streams on the go can have some hazards associated with it. In the meantime, well, I'm going to. Of course, there's not going to be any kind of there's not going to be any kind of Discord connection until we can get the stream back. If we've lost it, then we've lost it for tonight. I really apologize to the viewers. I'm going to try to get the connection back. I'll read one super chat, but I probably have to read it again once we get our guests back. We have for $4.99 from Rashid Abdul Salam. Again, thank you for your contribution. Sargon did the same thing that Sarah Jiang did. Troll racists by turning their own language and ideology and terminology, against them. Well, that's more or less what I thought, but apparently corporate America did not see it that way. But I'm going to continuously, Discord failed. So we're trying to reconnect here, but pardon me for having for the issues here. So I think we can get it back for the last 10 minutes, but in the meantime, I'm just not capturing anybody's stuff. So yeah, it's a total crash. Yeah, guys, give me a second. Well, we're going to have to end it if nothing else changes. Yeah, I can start the stand-up music if that's what people want, but that's probably not what people want. I think my Discord just completely crashed. Well, it was going so well, too. So much productive stuff. I could talk a little bit about... I'm going to try to have one more Christmas stream before we kick off the season, and that's going to be on possibilities looking forward to 2019, what we're looking forward to, and it'll be before the new year. So in the event that I can't get this back up, we'll try doing that. But I think hope might spring eternal, but I think I can get this back up by killing the application and bringing it back again or something. But we'll see. We'll see. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions on the chat, I can read those out. Well, someone said for $2, Catholic Canson said start standby music. Well, yeah, I already read that one out. Yeah, I know Discord crashed. That's absolutely what happened. Discord did crash. It's not coming back up again, which is the problem right now. But I'm hoping that I can hold out until when I was planning to end at 5:30. But it looks like it's going to be highly, I don't know. It's going to be doubtful. Yeah, guys, I'm sorry. This is not coming back. Well, let's see. I'll do 5 minutes of answering questions from the chat, and then if nothing happens, we'll just have to close the stream down and have an apology from my sincere apologies for cutting short such an interesting conversation. This is one reason why I really hate having to do this through Discord. Discord's really, really unreliable for streaming. I don't know what it is that makes it so unreliable. I can't think of anything better because at the time being, Skype isn't any better. And Skype has... and it seems like fewer and fewer people actually use Skype. So I have no idea... I know I can see I can see Ray saying that I realize that you were about to build a point, Ray. I just, it wasn't. It's very unfortunate that I am having this problem right now, but it doesn't look like it's coming back. Well, guys, I think that the only thing to do is to have a rain check on this issue, and to just close the chat down a little bit early. If there's no more super chats, then I'm going to answer whatever questions are there. So Kaito Bloom says your best video, and my take is your video on collectivism. When do you wish to further elaborate on it, and when are you talking to the academic agent about it? Yeah, so I have two people, and I was going to mention this at the end of the stream. I've got two promises. I promised Ray Murasami that I'd have her defend slavery reparations. Basically, this was a challenge issued earlier on my channel a long time ago, that anyone who's willing to defend slavery reparations could come on and defend them, and I'd take down a video I had against slavery reparations. And that offer is still open if Ray wants to take it up. And at the same time, I think we also had a conversation with academic agent and Danny Duchamp on the collectivism thing, which I've since become convinced this is just sort of a issue with terminology. I'm going to check the super chats one more time to make sure that I can get everything. Okay, so I already read the first few earlier on in the stream. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so we also have a few more super chats here that I missed. So please forgive me. So we have for $5 American. Thank you for your contribution. I guess it's going to go since no one typed in their charity into the stream. I guess this is also going to go to St. Vincent de Paul. Paul Cornelius says, Dave, please remind RW people that the left patches a serious contradictions ideology and don't feel obligated to resolve these contradictions. Yeah, I mean, so I think this means please remind right-wing people that the left patches a series of contradictions ideologically and does not feel obliged to resolve these contradictions. Well, you saw it in this conversation, right? Neither of the people on the left could agree on what racism meant, and both were racist by each other's definitions, in fact. I don't know how you resolve that. Usually the left has resolved that by saying that if you're a person of color, your definition should take priority, which means that Ray's definition of racism should have been the one preferred by my understanding of how these things culturally took precedence over each other. But I could be wrong. Thank you, Paul Cornelius. We have for £5, Francis Urquhart, I think that is. Please say she ain't Japanese. I'm pretty sure that Ray Murasami is ethnically Japanese, although it sounds like she's been living in Great Britain for quite a long time by the sound of her accent. But I apologize. I can't make definitive statements about people's ethnicities, unfortunately. Again, start Standby Music by Catholic Hansen. And then for €2, the Rightful King of Finland says, do a stream with Ivan the Heathen. He's a fan. Sure, I'd love to, but what's the topic I would do a stream on? That's sort of the question here. Yeah, that sounds great. I guess we'll have to close this down just because of a Discord. And that was the worst possible time, guys. I really apologize, but because of a Discord mishap, we're going to have to kill it. I know a few people said that they wanted me to remind them about there's some in real life meetups coming on the Discord server that I run. But we're trying to keep it sort of small, so I'm not going to talk about details online. If you want to join my server, join the community, and learn about it, that's obviously available to you. We're not doing a rally or anything. But that being okay. Anyway, so I think that we'll just have to end it there. Thank you so much for listening to this Christmas stream. And I hope everyone has a great evening, a great continuing Christmas, and basically has a great rest of the holidays. So with that, I will leave you to the rest of your celebrations.